Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Alright, so this portion is Chukat, which means statue. It's going to cover Numbers 19 all the way to 22, verse 1. And if it's not obvious, it's about the red heifers. There's a lot of stuff in this portion, but it does talk about the red heifers. And that's what I'm going to talk about in a way. You'll see where I'm going. But the red heifers are they're a point of controversy today because a lot of people, they don't really understand what's the function of the red heifer, how does the procedure work, and because of that, they make a lot of assumptions. So I've seen people say crazy things online about the red heifers and about the Jewish people over there in Israel because, again, they don't really understand the function of the red heifer. If you guys recall, there's 5 heifers. Well, there was 5 red heifers in Israel that they had set up for the slaughtering, but unfortunately, they all got disqualified. So it's not going to happen. So there's no red heifer slaughtering happening. But it was funny to see how people were reacting to it because you had a lot of mixed reactions from different people. But what made me sad was that there was a lot of Christians and a lot of Hebrew roots people that were saying a lot of nasty things about the Jews. And they have the Bible. So they would say things like the red heifer is an abomination because, Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice. So if they do the red heifer sacrifice, it's going to be an abomination to God. And if they do the temple, it's going to be an abomination. And that's because, they don't really understand, again, the function of the temple and the function of the red heifers. And that's what we're going to really try to focus on and also elaborate on other things. But before we do that, we're going to do the blessing for the Torah. Baruch Adonai HaMbarak, Baruch Adonai HaMbarak Le'olam Vayed, Baruch Atah Adonai Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher b'chavanu mikol ha'alim v'natan lanu Torato, Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. All right. So in the Torah, there's going to be 3 divisions of the laws. There's 3 different categories. You have Mishpatim, you have Edot, and you have Hukim. I'm going to go through each and every one of them. So if you're writing notes, you'll be able to follow along. But the Mishpatim, basically, those are the civil laws that we see in the Torah. And they're very similar to our laws that we have here in the U.S. and all over the nation. They all follow a same, logical understanding. If X happens, then Y consequence is going to happen. If I kill somebody, I go to jail or they put me to death. If I steal from somebody, I got to pay them back and then I go to jail. So it's very easy to understand these civic laws because they have a very rational, what would you call that? Rationality to it. But the whole point of these laws is that they promote justice, social order, and social ethics. And so they're supposed to keep everything in order. If you don't have any laws, things are just going to be chaotic. If we didn't have any laws here in the United States, people would just do whatever they want, and it would be like the purge all the time, So you had to have laws to keep order. And then you have Edot, and Edot are ritualistic laws that are meant to be commemorative. So they're supposed to remind us of some historical truth or some theological truth. A good example of that is Shabbat. Every week when we do Shabbat, we get together and we do the Kiddush, and we remind how God, He created the earth and the universe in 6 days, and then He rested on the 7th day, and that's why we keep the Shabbat, to remember that, to remember His sovereignty over the earth, and also how, He took the Israelites out of Exodus. So we always do that every single week. And then we have the Passover where we do the Seder, and we remind how God, saved the Israelites from slavery, saved them from death, and how one day in the future He'll have a greater redemption for all of us. And then we have the Tzitzits. The Tzitzits are supposed to remind us about the commandments to make sure that we keep them. Lucas talked a lot about it last week. But all these laws are meant to bear witness to certain events, and they're supposed to build our identity. That's why it's so important that we do the Shabbat. Because, when I used to be in Pentecostal church, when you go Sunday morning, you go to church, and then you leave, and then either you go out to eat or you watch the Sunday night football game, but that's pretty much it. Nobody's actually doing the Sabbath. It's very different than, in Judaism. They're very focused on this day. They don't use their phones sometimes. Everything is dedicated to God because it's a special day where you surround yourself, with things regarding God. And that's how you start building your life if you think about it. If you keep doing that consistently, it's going to have that effect in your life. And then we have the Hukim. And the Hukim, they're laws that don't really make any sense. They don't make any sense for us. But we keep them because God said so. For example, He says, don't eat pork. He doesn't really give a reason why. I know there's a lot of stuff online saying, there's scientific reasons why you shouldn't eat pork. There's health reasons why you shouldn't eat pork. But He didn't say that. He didn't say don't eat pork because it's unhealthy for you. He said don't eat it because I don't want you to. So it's very much like how a kid has to follow a parent's command. I don't know if you guys were ever, when you were little and your parents asked you to do something and you would say, why do I have to do it? What would they tell you? Because I said so. So they don't have to explain anything to you because, you're a little kid, they're a grown adult. At the time, you don't understand it, but now that you're older, you're like, yeah, the whole point of, obeying your parents is obedience. They don't have to explain every little detail. You're the kid, they're the parent, that's the dynamic. And it's the same thing here with the Hukim laws. We don't really understand them, but that's not the point of these laws. We're supposed to have faith in God that He has, everything in the right mindset. And that's why we should be obedient to Him, because no matter what, He's always going to have things perfect because, He has His will. So even when we don't understand them, we're supposed to keep these laws. And one of the Hukim laws is the red heifer. But before we get into the slaughtering and all the procedures, I do want to cover some basic facts about the red heifer. So first thing that's very important is that it's not an offering. It's not a korban. So when they say that the red heifer is a sacrifice, that's not right. It's a slaughtering. Okay, so it's not a korban. It's not even for sins. A lot of people would say that the red heifer, it's for sins. It's not for sins. It's for ritual corpse impurity. So if I touch a dead body, I need to be purified. I need the ashes of the red heifer. Okay, or if I go to a funeral and I'm standing in the grave, I will be ritually impure. Okay, so you don't have to even touch a dead body directly. Even if you're standing over a grave, you're ritually impure. So everybody here is ritually impure, some way or another. So we would all need the ashes if we were to go to the temple. And then this, because it's not an offering, it's going to be slaughtered outside the camp. And the entire body is going to be burnt. The fur, the meat, the flesh, the bones, the intestines, the feces, everything is going to be burnt. And I think it said it takes like 6 to 9 hours, if I'm not mistaken. So it's going to be a while for the whole thing to be burnt, and then you have to wait for the ashes to cool down. It has to be 3 to 4 years old. So that's the definition of a heifer. A heifer is a cow that it's mature enough to have a baby, but it hasn't had a baby yet. So it's like a virgin cow, if you want to look at it that way. It must never have been put to work. So it was never put to do any farm work. It had never had any yoke around its neck. You can't even put a rope around it and lead it. If they were to put a rope just to guide it, it would be disqualified. So I forgot how they lead the cow.
They push the cow.
I don't even think you're allowed to do that either.
They're not even allowed to have other cows next to it to encourage it to walk.
Yeah, so it's very I don't know if they do it like Minecraft style where they have a piece of hay and let it follow it around. I don't know how they do it, but it's very complicated. So this whole procedure is a very, very intricate thing. And it has to be completely red. Why? Because God said so. So if it has one white hair, it's disqualified. If it grows a white hair, that's it. And that's what happened to a lot of the cows in Israel. A lot of the cows, they grow white hair, and that was it. So those are pretty much the basics that you have to know when it comes to the red heifer. But why does it need to be needed to be rebuilt the temple? So if you go to Numbers 19:13, it says, "Whoever touches a human corpse and does not purify himself defiles the Lord's tabernacle. That person shall be cut off from Israel." And that's Numbers 19:13. So all of us here, again, like I said, we have ritual impurity. If we wanted to go to the temple and it was rebuilt, you wouldn't be allowed. If you did that, that would be like a death sentence. And if the temple needs to operate, if the priests are going to do the offerings and do all the procedures, they have to be ritually pure too. So they need the ashes to even start anything. So they can rebuild the altar, but they can't use it as long as they don't have the ashes of the red heifer. So that's why the red heifer is very important for the temple. And then we have Yeshua. He talks about in Matthew 24, the end of the age. He says, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken about by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains, for at that time there will be a great tribulation, such as not happened from the beginning of the world. Until now, nor ever will happen, and unless those days had been shortened, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened." So what is he referring to? So you have to go back to Daniel and read the context. When you go to Daniel 9:27, it's talking about the anti-Messiah. It says, "And he will make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, but in the half of the week he will let cease sacrifice and offering. And in its place a desolation abomination comes even until the determined complete destruction is poured out on the desolator." So before the abomination of desolation even shows up, he puts an end to the sacrifice. But if he puts an end to the sacrifice, that means sacrifice has started. And if sacrifice has started, that means they had the ashes of the red heifer. So we were very, 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 very close when the 5 red heifers came back to the beginning of the end. Like we were like really close. That's why it was very, it was very crazy for a lot of people. A lot of people were freaking out about that. So that's why it's important that we study this. So whenever it happens again in the future, when everybody's going crazy, you're the person that can, be sane and teach them about it. And a lot of people also were spreading misinformation too, and you can talk to those people too. So let's go over the steps of slaughtering the red heifer. So before they even slaughter the red heifer, they have to prepare the area. So right now the only area is going to be the Mountain of Olives. The reason why is because of the red heifer, when they slaughter it, it's supposed to be in front of the tent of meeting. And in the second temple, the only area where you can see the entrance is from the Mount of Olives. So they would set up that area. The altar has to be made of wood. And they would have these spaces in between so that way it doesn't touch the ground. Because if there is a corpse underneath that land, the cow would get defiled, the priest would get defiled, and the whole thing is pointless. So they would make this structure so that way there was gaps in between and they wouldn't touch the ground. So everything had to be very, again, elaborate. And then they would build like a temporary bridge. I think Joseph Good was saying it was a wooden bridge that they would build because you didn't have to keep the bridge there all year, like forever. From Moses, from this portion on, all the way to the second temple, there's only 9 red heifers that they slaughtered. So it lasted multiple generations. So you don't have to keep the bridge there. You can build it temporarily and then destroy it. Because if you left the bridge there, strategically it's not good because any enemies can come in from that area. So you wouldn't want to keep the bridge there. You'd want to, build it, use it, and then destroy it. And then the priest, he has to be isolated for 7 days to make sure that he doesn't come in contact with any corpses or somebody with corpse impurity. So that way he can do the slaughtering of the red heifer. Now the slaughtering itself is very intricate because the priest has to be facing the entrance of the temple. And then the red heifer, like pretend this is the head. The head has to be facing towards the temple too. So he would orient it so that way the head is there and then he would slaughter it. And then he would collect the blood and then he will sprinkle it 7 times towards the entrance.
Is that picture wrong?
Yeah, that picture's wrong. But that's the closest picture I could find online. I think actually the previous one is way better, but it's small. But it's supposed to be like that. See, look, he's facing towards the entrance. The head is facing towards the entrance. And that's how they had to do it. Why do they have to do it that way? Because God said so. There's no logical reason for why. And then after he sprinkles the blood 7 times, he would be unclean until evening. And that's the part that's strange for a lot of Jews. Why is he unclean if he didn't touch anything directly? It's a mystery. And then they would have to make the ashes. So again, the whole heifer is going to be burned. That's 6 to 9 hours. And while it's getting burned, they put cedar wood, hyssop. Hyssop is always used for stuff of purification. And then they would put a scarlet thread. Why? Because God said so. And then that person would be ritually unclean until evening. Even though, again, he didn't touch anything impure, but he's ritually unclean. It's strange. And then the person that's going to have to gather the ashes, that person's going to be ritually clean. The ashes are going to be stored outside the camp. And the guy that gathered the ashes, he's also ritually unclean until evening. Again, why? And then collecting the water is actually very weird. So to collect the water, they would have these special kid priests that were raised from birth. And they had to be raised in a special area. So they were raised like on a, how would you say that? I don't want to say like a hacienda, but kind of like a hacienda. Kind of. It was like a, I don't know how to say that in English. It was like a secluded area, but it was a special area where the floor had like a gap in between. So that way they didn't touch the ground. Because if they touch the ground and there's corpses, now they're impure and they're not qualified to get the water. So these kids would be raised in that area from birth and they would never leave that area. And then they would come down on ox and then they'd be riding the ox with this plank of wood. So that way they didn't touch the ox in case there was an impurity. Because I guess wood stops the impurity. Why? Again, that's what God said. And they would have to collect the water from living water. Anytime you hear something about living water, it's always moving water. So they would go to the pool of, sorry? Flowing, moving. Tomato. Okay. But yeah, so they would have to go, usually they would go to the pool of Siloam. Am I saying that right? Siloam. So they would go to the pool of Siloam. It says that they're not supposed to get down, So I'm assuming somebody else would collect it for them, and they would use like a earthware vessel. They were not allowed to use their hands to cup it. They had to leave the vessel in there, let the water go in, pick it up, and then give it to the kid. And then the kid would go back up. And then afterwards, they would get the ashes, and then they would mix it. And the guy that mixed it, he was unclean until evening too. And then whenever they had to use it to purify somebody, whoever sprinkled the water was unclean until evening. And that's the strange part for the Jews. They don't understand why somebody is unclean if they didn't touch anybody directly. And that's the mystery of the red heifer. And there's actually a midrash on that. Can somebody read it for me? There's a midrash in Numbers by Rabbah. Somebody can read that.
Says Solomon, I have succeeded in understanding all of the Torah, but the section dealing with the red heifer, though I have examined it, though thought into it and investigated it, I have said, I will be wise, but it is far from me.
So the thing with midrash is, you're not supposed to take it as literal. A lot of people take these things like it actually happened. Are you going to find this in the Torah or any of the Tanakh? No, because it's not something that Solomon really said. The way they do midrashes is like a way they tell a story so that way they can teach you something. Okay, and that's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to say like you could be the wisest person in all the Torah like Solomon, but you're never going to understand certain laws like the Hukim laws, like the red heifer, because it's not about you understanding, it's about you obeying. And that's what Solomon understood in the midrash. So that's what he's trying to teach you. It's a very big mystery. You're never going to figure it out, but you do it because we obey God. That's the point of the midrash. But the whole point of what I'm trying to show you guys is that for them, it's a huge mystery. They don't understand the red heifer. They don't understand why is somebody going to be unclean if they didn't touch anybody. So again, like the one who slaughtered the heifer, the one who burnt the heifer, the one who collected the ashes, mixed the ashes, and the guy that sprinkled the water, they all become unclean without direct contact. And if you look at the Bible, all the other impurities, like the woman, if she has her menstrual cycle, the man, if he has those bodily fluids, what else is there? What am I missing? Whenever a woman has a baby, they're impure for a certain amount of time. But if they touch somebody else, that person's impure too. But they have to touch somebody. Or they have to sit somewhere and somebody sits in that spot.
Not in the case of guys.
Not in the case of guys.
And certain, and for girls who gave birth, it's like only a certain amount.
Yeah, like in a general sense, that's how most of it works. But it always came to direct contact. I think with guys, it's still direct contact. Yeah, it should be.
I think so.
I think so.
I think it's like only once, like to one person, but then that person can't contaminate.
Oh, no,
But
yeah.
in the case of a woman, it's like
It can go like that?
it depends.
I think it depends, no?
TMI, it depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you still have to touch somebody. That's the truth, right?
Yes.
I can't just be like, oh, I'm standing next to a lady and then all of a sudden I'm dirty. Like, no. Or a dude or whatever. I have to completely touch somebody to get impure. But the thing about the red heifer, even though they're not doing anything bad, they're doing, purification rituals, they become unclean. That's weird. It's like they kind of absorb that impurity somehow indirectly. It's strange. Even in the case of leprosy, if somebody has leprosy and they become clean, and the priest has to do the procedure where he puts the blood on his earlobe, the thumb, and the toe, he doesn't become unclean. But for somebody doing the red heifer ashes, he does. So that's very strange. But now if we go to Hebrews 9, 13, 14. Somebody read that for me? Crystal?
Yeah. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of flesh, how much more will the blood of Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse our consciences? Consciences?
Yes.
Consciences.
Consciousnesses?
Consciences. From dead works to serve the living God.
So a lot of people, they use this verse and they say like, well, see, look, the temple is done away with because, Yeshua is the better sacrifice. The other sacrifices were not good enough. So that's why Yeshua had to come. Temple's done away with. I can eat bacon or whatever they say. And then that's it. But the question that you have to ask, because this author, he is Jewish and he has a Jewish mindset. So you have to try to understand what is he trying to tell us. For example, when it says blood of goats and bulls, what appointed time do we see a goat and a bull offered in the temple? Pretend you didn't hear that. Give me your best answer. Not you, Obed. What's the appointed time where you see a goat and a bull offered?
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur, right? So he's making a reference to Yom Kippur, right? Why is he making a reference to Yom Kippur? What's the function of Yom Kippur? It's in Leviticus 16:16. It says, "Thus Aaron shall make atonement for the sanctuary from the Israelites' impurities and from the transgressions for all their sins." So the whole point of Yom Kippur is to clean the temple of the Israelites' sins, right? And what happens if they don't do that? What's going to happen eventually?
God can't dwell.
What?
God can't dwell within them.
God can't dwell with them? Why?
Impure.
Impure, but why though? Like, elaborate. If somebody else could elaborate.
What are you looking for?
It's not a Jonathan question. It's very simple.
What was the question?
Well, I said, if they don't do the Yom Kippur procedure, what's going to happen?
Death.
Well, let's not go that far. Temple's going to be dirty, right? And then what's going to happen with God? He's going to leave. Why?
Because God can't be connected to death.
Well, death, sin, he's a holy person, right? So he can't be in somewhere that's dirty. Okay, yeah? So that's the whole point of Yom Kippur. It's a procedure to keep God connected to his people. If they don't do that procedure, God is just going to go vamoose and everybody else is going to... What? Just say it.
Are you hot?
No.
Okay.
Are you?
Are y'all hot?
You-
It's
Sorry,
got-
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Got
So procedure to keep God connected to his people.
Yes. Okay. So that's the whole point of Yom Kippur. Can we agree on that? Yes. Okay. Yes. And then the red heifer. What's the purpose of the red heifer? If you read this portion, it says, "Whoever touches the dead body of any person shall be unclean 7 days. He shall clean himself with water on the 3rd day and the 7th day. Whoever touches a dead person and does not clean himself defiles the tabernacle of the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from Israel." So if you don't purify yourself with the red heifer ashes, what's going to happen? Death. What happens if nobody purifies themselves, including the priests? There's no temple. And then what happens if there's no temple? What's going to happen to God? He's going to go vamoose. So it's another important procedure to keep God's connection with his people. So they both have that in common with Yom Kippur and the red heifer. But Yom Kippur is more with sins, and the red heifer is with death. I'm sorry?
But they go together.
They do go together. They do go together. And the author connects that with Yeshua. And if you read the book of Hebrews earlier, you see how he makes that connection. Somebody read this for me. I promise it's short.
That's defeated.
Read the next part. Yes.
For in subjecting all things, God left nothing that was not subject to him. But now we do not yet see all things subjected to him. But we see Yeshua for a short time made lower than the angels, because of the suffering of death crowned with glory and honor. So that apart from God, he might taste death on behalf of everyone.
Everyone, right? Not just Israel, the whole world, right?
Therefore, since the children share in blood and flesh, he also in like manner shared in these same things, in order that through death he could destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and could set free these things to the fear of death, were subject to slavery throughout all their lives.
So the author's saying here that the purpose of why Yeshua had to die was to free not just Israel, but all of humanity from death, because that's the one thing, no matter who you are, we all have the same fate. It talks about that in the book of Ecclesiastes. I almost said that wrong. Ecclesiastes 9, it says, "So all this I laid to my heart, and I concluded that the righteous and the wise, as well as their deeds, are in the hand of God. So no one knows anything that will come to them. Whether it will be love or hatred, the same fate comes to everyone. To the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and to the wicked, to the clean and to the unclean, to those who sacrifice and to those who do not sacrifice. As with the good man, also to the sinner, as with those who swear an oath, so also those who fear oaths. This is the injustice that is done under the sun. The same fate that comes to everyone." And it kind of rhymes. But what is he saying here? No matter who you are, if you're a good person, you could be the best person in the world, or you could be like the most wicked person, Hitler of the world. You're both going to die. Does that seem fair? So there's like this injustice. something has to be corrected, right? Right? Was that God's original plan for us to all die? Why do we all die? Don't say it. Don't say it. Somebody else, somebody different. Why do we all die on this earth, according to the Bible? You. I'm pointing in the corner. Why do we all die, according to the Bible? Why do we all sin? Whose fault is it? Specifically a specific person. In the very beginning? There's Eve and then Adam. Wait, for simplicity, Adam. Okay. Let's go with Adam, okay? So,
I bet that's what Adam said too.
I mean, literally, he said that. He said, God, it was your fault. You made her for me. He said it that way.
But Adam was supposed to instruct Eve.
Stop right there. Excuse me. So God's original plan was he created the earth, he created the universe, everything was perfect, and then everything finished with God resting on the Sabbath with humanity. So everything was supposed to be fine and dandy right there. But then unfortunately, Eve and then Adam sinned, right? And then everything fell apart. What happened? What came into the world? Sin. And as a byproduct, death. But if there's death and sin, can God dwell with us? No, right? But his original plan was to dwell on the earth with us. That's the original plan. Things happen, humanity goes away, but God is always bringing him back because he wants to dwell with him. He wants to have a relationship with him. Even though humanity is like a rebellious teenager, he's like, leave me alone. I want to look cool. But God's always bringing them back. What's the purpose and the function of the tabernacle? Why did we make the tabernacle? Why do we make the tabernacle, Andrew? Why do we make the tabernacle, Andrew? Whose idea was it? It was God's idea? Why? It's very simple. A lot of people overlook it. Why? So you can dwell with us, right? A lot of people don't even know the answer. It's such a basic answer. But the reason why we have the tabernacle is because God wants to be with us. It's that simple. Everything else after that, those are just procedures to maintain that space. Otherwise, God, again, like I said, he goes vamoose if everything's bad. But God wants to restore everything. He wants to go back to this original plan. You see that at the end of Revelation. Once death is destroyed, God himself dwells on earth. Not just his presence, himself with Yeshua. And that's what he wants to go back to. How is he going to do that? How is he going to fix that? How is he going to get rid of death? We just read it. Yeshua. But now a lot of people have issues with that statement because they say, well, in the Torah, it doesn't say that there's anything about, a righteous person atoning for somebody like that. That's a human sacrifice. That's against the Torah. A lot of people say stuff like that. But I'm here to tell you that there actually is writings in the Talmud that talk about atonement of the righteous. Okay? So especially in this portion is where they started out. If you read this portion, which I hope you did, the red heifer starts off at the beginning, and then it just goes into the death of Miriam. And if you're a Western reader, you don't really think much about it because you're like, well, it's just a chronological story, right? The red heifer thing happened, and then Miriam died, and then Moses got mad, and then Aaron died. So you just read it as like a chronological story. But for Jewish people, everything has a connection. Everything has a coincidence, even down to the letters. If the letter is written a certain way, right, it means something. So they make all these connections, and that's how they think. That's their mindset. So for them, it's not a coincidence. There's a reason why the red heifer and Miriam's death are right next to each other, and you can read about it in the Talmud in their commentaries. So you have this commentary, Moed Katan, am I saying that right? 28a. It says, Rabbi Ami said, "Why was the Torah portion that describes the death of Miriam juxtaposed or put right next to the portion dealing with the red heifer? To tell you, just as the red heifer atones for sin, so too the death of a righteous atones for sin." Ooh. But then there's a lot of modern, rabbis, they'll say something like, well, it doesn't mean like a sacrifice. It means something like, if a good person leaves the community, they're all sad, and it makes you reflect on life, and it makes you repent. Which is kind of true. You can say that. But if you read the other commentaries, it's not really saying that. So you have Rashi's commentary on Numbers 21. He says, why is the section narrating the death of Miriam placed immediately after the section treating of the red cow? To suggest to you the following comparison. What is the purpose of the sacrifice? They affect atonement. So too does the death of a righteous affect atonement. Ooh. Okay, yeah, it keeps going. There's a commentary on Vayikra. It says, on the first of Nisan, Aaron's sons died. Why then does it mention their death on Yom Kippur? It teaches that just as Yom Kippur atones, so too the death of the righteous atones. From where is it derived that Yom Kippur atones? As it is stated, from on this day he shall atone for you, to purify you. From where is it derived that the death of a righteous atones? As it is written, they bury the bones of Saul, and it is written, and God acceded to the treaty of the land thereafter. So it's not just a Christian pagan mindset of a righteous person dying for atonement and giving us atonement. This is, according to the Jews. Okay, they have this belief in their Talmud. So it's not just me being crazy. And there's another commentary. It says there, it must be understood in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Gurion, as Rabbi Gurion said, and some say that it was Rav Yosef, son of Rabbi Shemaiah, who said it at a time when there are righteous people in the generation. The righteous are seized. That is, they die or suffer for the sins of the generation. Rashi says, this is his commentary on the commentary, that they died of the sin of the generation, and their death brings atonement, kapara. And kapara is a very interesting word. So if we go to Leviticus 17:11, this is where God said that life is in the blood. He says, indeed, the flesh's life is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your lives, because it is the blood with the life that makes atonement. So if we look at that word atonement, it's going to be, how do you pronounce it?
Kippur or Yechaper?
How?
There, Yechaper.
Yechaper? Yechaper. I'm probably butchering it. But it comes from kofer. Kofer. Kofer? It comes from kofer. And kofer can mean a bribe, a ransom, a sum of money. Why is that so important? Because when you look at kapara, it's not just atonement. In the Christian mindset of atonement, atonement means like, oh, something is forgiven, whatever. But in the Hebrew mindset, kapara is covering, it's cleansing, it's reconciliation. So it means a relationship is repaired and an impurity is removed. So keep that in mind when we talk about Yeshua. Relationship repaired, impurity removed. What did I say, Yom Kippur? Without it, what's the whole point of the procedure? It keeps God's relationship with the people, right? Same thing with the red heifer. It keeps God's relationship with the people. And that's what the author of Hebrews is trying to tell you, that Yeshua's whole point of his sacrifice is to repair the relationship with God and keep his connection with the people, removing that impurity that we have, the sin in our hearts that causes death, taking it out. So if you go to Hebrews 9:15, it says, and because of this, Yeshua, is a mediator of a new covenant in order that because death has taken place for the redemption of transgressions committed during the first covenant, those who are the called may receive the promise of eternal inheritance. Now, in some translations, redemption is ransom. Okay, and if you look at that word in the Greek, it's apolytrosis. Am I saying that right? And apolytrosis comes from latron. And latron, if you use the Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Tanakh. It was made before Yeshua's time, I think like 100 years before Yeshua was even born. They made it because there was Jews in the diaspora. They were living in Greek towns and cities, and they didn't speak any Hebrew. They only spoke Greek. So to make sure that they didn't forget about the Tanakh, they created this translation called the Septuagint. And that was the most popular translation used during the time of Yeshua, during the time of Paul. Whenever the New Testament is quoting the Old Testament, it's quoting the Septuagint. And there's a lot of anti-missionaries that say, like, well, the New Testament misquotes the Old Testament. So that's how you know the New Testament is not God-breathed. But it's actually quoting the Septuagint. The Septuagint words things a little bit differently. And the reason why they started to split, because it used to be popular with the Jews too. The reason why it started to split is because they didn't want an association with Christianity and with the believers of Yeshua. Because the believers were using the Septuagint to prove that it says that Yeshua is the Messiah. And they didn't like that, so they made another translation. And that's how things slowly started drifting. But the Septuagint was used by everybody, by the believers of Yeshua, by the Jews for hundreds of years, even after Yeshua died. I think like 200 or 300 years. So it's going to be the most popular translation. So if you want to understand a word used in the New Testament and understand its original context, you can use the Septuagint because it's from the Tanakh, right? So you can kind of do a cross-reference. So you can look up latron, see how it's used in the Greek Tanakh, and then find its Hebrew equivalent. And then you find a connection. So the Latron's Hebrew equivalent is koper. And koper, again, remember, is it's used for the word atonement in reference to Leviticus, 16, 17, 11? So there's a connection there with Yeshua and the word used in Leviticus 17, 11. And a lot of people will say, well, that's crazy because, you don't really see that in the Torah of, a human giving his life to give everybody else life. You don't see that in the Torah. But again, that's not true. They don't read their Bibles. Exodus 32, 30 to 34, it says, the next day Moses said to the people, you have committed a great sin. Oh, what happened was, again, they had the golden calf. God was really upset. God told Moses, I'm going to wipe out everybody and I'm just going to start over with you. And then Moses, as a mediator, as a good mediator, he didn't put the blame on Eve. He said, hey, we have these promises. You have your ancestors. Don't forget about them. Don't forget about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all the work that they did. So please don't go out with that plan. And God says, okay, that's fine. I won't do that. And then Moses goes to the people the next day and he says, you have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement, koper, ransom, for your sin. So Moses went back to the Lord and said, oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written. So he's literally putting his life on the line for the lives of other people. There's a connection right there. And the Lord replied to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go and lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin. Okay? So if you keep reading Hebrews 11, it brings up Abraham and Isaac. It says, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. And even though God has said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned, Abraham reasoned that God could even raise him from the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. So this is where the idea of resurrection comes from the binding of Isaac, because they say that Abraham has so much faith in God and his promise that he believed that even if he killed Isaac, God would resurrect him to keep his promise. And that's where the idea of resurrection comes from. But what's very interesting about the binding of Isaac is if you look at the Midrash interpretation of Isaac's binding, they view Isaac's binding as an actual type of sacrifice. Not a human sacrifice, but they see the concept of atonement with Isaac's binding. So you have this from the Midrash. It says, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Abraham, you offered your son. So I will consider it as if Isaac's ashes are piled on the altar. Very interesting. And then this one, it also says, whenever the descendants of Isaac sin, I shall regard it as if Isaac were bound on the altar. Whoa. And then this in the Machzor for the Rosh Hashanah, it says, remember the binding of Isaac for his descendants today with compassion. So the idea of somebody sacrificing themselves for the atonement of everybody is not a crazy idea. It's not a Christian idea. It's a very Jewish idea. So if anybody says otherwise, there's the verses. So to summarize everything that I said, the red heifer is not an offering. So if anybody says it's a sacrifice, it's not a sacrifice. It's for death. It's for the impurity of corpse impurity. Okay, and it's very essential for the rededication of the altar. So if we see a red heifer now, again, we could be very close to the beginning of the end. That's why everybody was freaking out last time. But that's why you have to be ready and make sure that you're knowledgeable. That way, if anything happens, you're the person that can say, hey, everything's going to be okay. But it removes, like I said, the impurity of death. And the author of Hebrews connects that to Yeshua, how he removed the sin in our hearts, which causes death, so that way we can have eternal life. And then we talked about the idea of a righteous person atoning for the community. A lot of anti-missionaries say that is not biblical, that it is not in the Torah. But as I showed you, according to the sages, it is. It's found in Jewish thought. It originated in this portion. And death brings kapara. That's what they said. It brings a kapara, and kapara is ransom. And that ties in with Yeshua, where it says that Yeshua paid his life as a ransom for us. So as we can see, all you got to do is make sure to read your Bible and study. That's it.
Is that the same like the high priest dying with the cities of refuge?
I didn't check that, but I'm pretty sure there's a connection there too. But yeah. So all you got to do before you make any conclusion, always study. Okay? That's it. Bye-bye. I do. Oh, it's so.